All right. Good morning, everybody. Beat Connect! Sorry, I couldn't resist. Welcome to ETHDenver. My name is Kent. I'll be your MC for the first half of the day here. As a reminder, this is the ETH Stage, where we have workshops throughout the day. We also have the Way Stage over here, W-E-I, Way. So be sure to check out both. I want to welcome everybody. I believe we have people from no fewer than 23 nations attending today's event. And I believe this is the largest blockchain hackathon to date ever so far. So thank you for coming. There'll be a lot more interesting things going on today. Super excited. If you see people walking around in purple shirts, give them a high five, because this would not happen without the work of the volunteers. So thank you, volunteers and staff. You're making this happen. So without any further ado, I want to invite our first guest for the workshop up to the stage. Haseeb Rabbani is currently with BlockGeeks, and currently working on a project called ethers.io, which is a perfect example of building utility into the Ethereum ecosystem. We're going to learn all about that right now. So welcome.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, awesome. Let's get started. Hey, everyone. My name is Haseeb, and I am one of the instructors at BlockGeeks, and I like to call myself a devangelist. I'm super excited to be here with all of you today at this amazing event. And thanks to the ETHDenver team for organizing all this and getting everybody together. This is great. And thanks for having BlockGeeks as a sponsor as well. We're really proud to be a part of this hackathon. So thanks for having us. So my workshop is called Intro to Ethers.io. And before we dive into that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on BlockGeeks. So BlockGeeks is based in Toronto, so we're from Canada. And one of the co-founders of BlockGeeks is Dmitry Buterin, who also happens to be Vitalik Buterin's father. And I like to bring that up because Dmitry first encouraged Vitalik to learn about Bitcoin and blockchains, and he went on to invent Ethereum. And that really resonates with me because it goes to show how the right type of encouragement and guidance early on can literally change the world. And so continuing in that spirit of learning, we have BlockGeeks, and what we're doing with BlockGeeks is encouraging everyone to learn and to learn about blockchain, to learn about Ethereum, and to learn how to build these awesome new applications. And so the way BlockGeeks does this is, so we have a bunch of online courses that we've produced ourselves. So we're building a blockchain curriculum. We also have a bunch of free articles and guides online that you may have come across while you were Googling around for information about what blockchain is. And we also do a lot of in-person workshops like this, where we get to interact with people and demonstrate some live coding examples. And yeah, but the key point here is we develop the blockchain engineering talent, and that's where you guys come in. So thanks for being here. So let's get into ethers.io. So what is ethers.io? It is a dApp development framework, right? So you can use ethers.io to help you quickly build a decentralized application. And it was actually created by Richard Moore. I'm not sure if Richard is here right now, but he will be at this event. So Richard Moore also wrote the ethers.js library that some of you may have used. So he's pretty awesome, and this is his latest project called ethers.io. And the way we install this, it's available as a node module, so it's really easy to install. All you have to do is npm install ethers-cli, and this will give you a bunch of command line tools that will make it easy for you to quickly get a dApp up and running. So how does ethers.io compare to other dApp development frameworks like Truffle, right? Truffle is one of the most popular dApp development frameworks. today. So, ethers.io is also a dApp development framework, but it has some minor differences, right? So first difference is there's only one NPM module to install, so it's a lot quicker to get set up and running. Whereas with Truffle, you have to install a bunch of other libraries as well. Ethers.io doesn't require running an Ethereum node, so it'll use Infura and other service providers for you. So you don't actually have to run Geth or Ganache at all. It also comes with a web server bundled in that node module that allows you to quickly get your front end serving through a local HTTP server, and you can quickly see what your dApp looks like. And it also includes this front-end hosting where you can host your dApps called Etherspace, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. But yeah, you should definitely check out the documentation at docs.ethers.io. I'm only going to cover the basics in this workshop. There's a lot of cool features that you should definitely dig deep into the documentation to learn more about. But before we get into any development, let's take a second to appreciate app architecture, right? So here we have a traditional web app architecture of today, right? Like we usually divide our apps into front ends and back ends. And the front end is, the code that runs inside your web browser, inside your Chrome. And it's written in HTML, CSS, JavaScript for the most part, right? And we also have a back end that is our actual application logic, right? And that usually sits on a hosting server like AWS, and it's usually written in Rails, Django, or Node.js, whatever you prefer. And the way the front end and the back end typically communicate is by sending HTTP messages, and we usually use something like jQuery to help us send those messages back and forth between the front end and the back end. So that's how traditional web apps are architected today. But with dApps, the architecture changes slightly, right? So we still have a front end and a back end, right? And the front end, for the most part, stays the same, right? Like we still write the front end in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It still runs inside your web browser. But the back end part over here looks kind of different, right? So we're not using AWS anymore or another hosting service. We're actually using the Ethereum blockchain as our back end. And the smart contracts that we deploy to the Ethereum blockchain contain our application logic, and we can interact with the back end also using libraries like jQuery, but also Web3.js, which some of you may have come across as a popular JavaScript library to help you interact with blockchains. So, okay, now that we've understood, a little bit of the architecture. So if we zoom into the front end part, so that's what we're going to be focusing on in this workshop, the front end UI, and we're going to use ethers.io to build that front end UI. And so if we zoom into that front end square, we'll see something like this, which is the ethers.io architecture. And all I'm trying to point out over here is that ethers.io keeps your keys local, right? So they never leave your computer, right? So they stay local and protected. Also, the way the Ethers application, so this is the application in the middle, and applications run inside an ethers.io container, right, which is running inside your web browser, right? And the container sort of manages the keys for you, so you don't have to worry about keeping the keys safe. And your application lives inside this iframe, and we direct to this iframe using this link over here, right? So it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but there's a URL fragment right over here where we're pointing to the app that we want to load into the iframe. So that's kind of the gist of how ethers.io sandboxes your app and it protects keys from just being exposed on the internet. One thing to watch out over here, though, is that hosting your dApp on the same domain, like ipfs.io, can lead to some storage clobbering issues. And this is not specific to ethers.io, right? Like if you if you share the domain, like you're sharing the local storage, and if you have a dApp that is stored on ipfs.io, for instance, then that will be sort of detected as the same domain, and there may be some clobbering of local storage. So that's just one thing to be aware of as well. Okay, now let's get to the coding part. So what we're going to build is a simple blockchain explorer using ethers.io. And if we bring up a browser, so what does a blockchain explorer look like? You may have already used one at etherscan.io. Let's try to zoom in a bit. And all Block Explorer really does is gives you a nice UI to view what's going on in the blockchain, right? So over here, Etherscan is one of the most popular block explorers, right? And we have a list of the latest blocks that are being generated on the blockchain, and the latest transactions that are being mined in those blocks as well, right? But we're going to build a really simple version of this, and all we're going to do is display the last 10 blocks on the blockchain, right? So that's all we're going to do. We're going to build a really watered-down version of this. And just one more thing before we get into the code. Like, all of the code will be available online at a link at the end of the presentation. So if you just want to follow along and make note of any questions, I would recommend that, because you'll get the code at the end anyway. Okay, now let's write, or let's create our project structure. I'm going to try to zoom in. Okay, so we'll start by creating a project for our, a folder for our project, and we'll just call it Block Explorer. CD into it, and we're only gonna write one file, which is an index.html file, right? So let's create that file over here, and we'll open it up in a text editor. Right, so all we have in this folder is this index.html, and I'm just going to bring it over into an editor. Okay, cool. I'm just using the brackets editor. You can feel free to use whatever editor you like. Cool. So let's start writing our HTML. We'll declare our HTML tags. We'll declare our head and body. And let's give this a title. And we're just going to use a simple HTML table to display the data of the blocks, right? So I'm just going to define a really simple HTML table. So the only information that we're going to display about our blocks is the block number, the block hash, and the block timestamp. And in order to do this, we're going to first import the Ethers app JavaScript, which will allow us to interact with the blockchain to load data into this table. Right? So I'm just going to import the Ethers app JavaScript. And it's available at a CDN, and the latest version is actually 0.4. And we're just going to use a minified version of the Ethers app JavaScript, and we're going to use it to load data into our table. So I'm going to set up Ethers. So we can set up our page using one of the sort of hooks provided by Ethers, and I'm going to demonstrate that right now. Okay, so I passed a function, or I set a function to ethers.onReady, right? So what this does is, maybe you're used to setting up your Web3 provider and instance and detecting which one to use. So ethers.onReady sort of hides all that away from you and abstracts that away, and all you have to do is provide whatever app initialization logic you want to do inside this onReady function. So let's give this a whirl in the browser, right? And we can really quickly serve this index.html by, we're in the same project folder, and we're going to use our Ethers command line tools that we installed, right? And so we say ethers-build serve, right? And it starts up a local HTTP server. And I can really quickly take a look at what it looks like in the browser. And this is just giving me a warning that I'm not using HTTPS, and that's OK for development, but probably not for production. So we're just going to say OK for now. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and we can see that our table shows up. Right, so that looks good, but we also have a bunch of other code that we didn't write, right? So this is the ethers.io container, right? And it provides a way for you to manage your accounts. It also provides some wallet functionality. So this is the Ethers container, and our app is running inside of this container. So our app can interact with this container and use it to sort of to sign messages, for instance, right? So and we're going to see an example of that. So the next step is we got our front end running. The next step is to get some data loaded in here. So let's write the JavaScript that will actually load the data. Oh, and we can quickly check our hello world as well, that it came up in the console. If we go to developer tools, we can see that our hello world was printed out. Okay, and we'll come back to this console as well. So I'm going to write an update blocks function, which is going to use the Ethers API to get block information. I'm going to put my mic down. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is get the latest block number. And I'm going to do that by calling ethers.blockchain.getBlockNumber. And this is going to return a JavaScript promise, so we're going to pass it a callback function. I'm just going to move it up on the screen. Is this text size OK? Should I zoom in more? Cool. Let's verify real quick that our function over here is working as expected. So if we just go back to our browser and refresh the page, we should see the latest block number being printed out to the developer console. Okay, there was a typo. There we go. Cool, let's try that again. Awesome, and we got a block number printed out here. And if we just compare, so it says 5101632, and if we just compare that to what we see on Etherscan, 5101596. So it looks about right. It looks like we're getting the right data from the blockchain, right? So now let's do something with this data. So now that we have the latest block number, we want to get the last 10 blocks, right? So we're just going to do a simple for loop and request the block information for each of those 10 blocks, right? So I'm going to write that for loop right now. Cool. So all I did here was use ethers.blockchain.getBlock, and I passed it the block number, right? And I said number minus I because I want the last 10 blocks. And then this callback function will print the block, right? So we'll write this print block function real quick as well. But all print block is going to do is take the block and add it into the HTML. Right, so I've just gotten references to my table, and I inserted a new row at the bottom of the table, and got references to the 3 columns in that new row that I created. And now I just populate those cells with the data. Cool, and we just use these properties from the block, the number, the hash, the timestamp, and we set the HTML. So now let's give this a whirl in our browser and see what happens. Nice. So we got a list of blocks printed out, right? So they're not in any particular order. Right, because the Ethers app API is asynchronous, so that's why they weren't printed out in any particular order. But we see that we got, you know, the block number, the block hash, and the block timestamp. And one other cool trick that I'd like to show you is just by changing the domain, right? So if I wanted to point this to the Ropsten testnet, right, all I have to do is type Ropsten here. Ropsten.ethers.io, and it'll give me the insecure warning again because it's a different domain. And it's going to print out a different set of block numbers for me because it's printing out information from the Ropsten testnet. right? So just by changing the domain name, I could point it to a different blockchain network, which is pretty cool. Okay. So let's get to okay. Now, how do we deploy this? So we have this running, this really simple blockchain explorer running locally, but now we want to make this available to to the public, to other people, so that they can come and interact with it, right? So how would we do that, right? So we would publish this to Etherspace, and you would basically get a domain on Etherspace that points to your app. So let's see how we would do that. We'll use the command line tool, so I'm just going to turn the server off for now, clear my terminal. And so to use Etherspace, you also need to have Git installed, right? Source control tool, Git. A lot of you probably already have it, so you need to use Git in order to manage your files that you want to upload to Etherspace, right? So we need to initialize a Git repository first, and we'll say git init, right? So this will create an empty Git repository. And we're also going to say ethers build init because we want to generate a key file that we're going to use to upload to Etherspace, right? So it's asking me to set a password on my new key file. Enter it again. Cool, and all this did was create this account.json key file, right? Encrypted with my password that I entered, right? And we're going to see how to use this to upload to Etherspace in a second. So to first tell Ethers about which files we want to deploy, we first need to put them under Git, right? So we need to tell Git about our files. So I'm just going to add our index.html, right, and create a commit. Cool, and now I can check that Ethers build has picked this up by running ethers build status, right? And it sees that one file was added and that this account.json is untracked, right? So it's just it's just using Git to determine which files you want to prepare and deploy, right? So now that we've told Ethers which files we want to deploy, we're going to use the ethers build prepare command to prepare our dApp for deployment. And we're going to sign it as well using the key file that we just generated, right? So we pass in the -- signed option, but you can also do it unsigned if you just want to pass it to your friends. But if you're deploying to production, it has to be signed. So this will prompt me for my password that I just used for my key file, right? And it's going to create a slug file, right? So if I just do ls again, it created this .slug file that represents the signed version of my dApp, right? And to deploy this now, all I have to do is copy the slug file name and say ethers build publish, and then the name of the slug file. And if we do that and we give it, okay, that happened pretty quick. So this is our Etherspace domain name, right? So what we did was we took our dApp, our index.html, and we deployed it to this place called Etherspace. And now anyone can access our dApp in the world, right? So if they just take this link, right? This is all you have to share. And we just paste it in here. We should see the same application. Awesome. Cool, yeah, so the only difference between this version and this version is that over here we've deployed to Etherspace, whereas over here our dApp was local and we were developing on it. So yeah, I think that brings me to the end of my coding demo. Another thing I wanted to point out is that Ethers comes with an iOS app, so you can actually use your apps on your phone, right? So so Ethers has a mobile browser on iOS that you can use to basically see this exact same app, right? So that's another really cool feature of Ethers. There's a lot of testing features that I'm not covering over here, but I encourage you to check out the documentation online. They have a lot of example projects that you should definitely check out and see how to set up tests for your dApp. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, right? So as I promised, all the coding resources are available at this link, right? So if you go to bit.ly/codingblockchain, you'll see a bunch of links. Some of them are developer resources. Some of them are links to the BlockGeeks GitHub that has the source code that you just saw. So you can go check out that code and study it more. Yeah, you can learn more about blockchain by signing up at BlockGeeks. We offer a 7-day free trial, but also on top of that, we're offering a 25% discount code, which is BG ETHDenver. So if you use that when you're signing up on BlockGeeks, you'll get 25% off. And yeah, our next workshop is going to be on Facebook. It's going to be a live stream, and it's on February 22nd, just on our Facebook page, so anyone can participate and comment and ask questions. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about Ethers or blockchain or how to get started. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me via email or in person if you see me walking around. More than happy to answer your questions. Yeah, and that concludes my presentation. So thank you for listening.